Hi, I'm Nick from Lucifer, and this is
Johanna from Lucifer.
And you are listening to the Rock God Podcast.
Vaya con Dios, amigo.
What's that mean?
Go with God.
You're listening to the Rock God Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Rock God Podcast, the only podcast that talks to rock and heavy metal musicians about their thoughts or opinions about God. I'm your host, David Locklear, the owner and head writer at heavy-vinyl.com. Today we are interviewing vocalist Joy Von Spain of blackened operatic doom metal band Eye of Nix. Eye of Nix formed in the Pacific Northwest in 2012, and they released 2 full-length albums and a demo EP, crafting music that is both threatening and beautiful through mesmerizing rhythms, emotive melodies, and fiery aggression. Their most recent release, Black Somnia, was recently reissued by Prophecy Records, and it was recorded by renowned producer Billy Anderson, who also produced Bell Witch and Pallbearer, and mastered by Brad Boatwright, who also did mastering for Gatecreeper and Necrot. The album centers on themes of fear, control, and anxiety while shape-shifting through a lens of blackened psychedelia and doom. Von Spain kindly took a few minutes out of her busy day to talk to us about the band's upcoming music, growing up in the South, and the dark observations of the world she expresses through her lyrics. appreciate you talking to me for a few minutes. I was actually listening. I was listening to your first album from 2015 this morning.
Really?
Yeah, I was, and the song that stuck out to me was the song "We Perish," and that one was, for some reason I think that one was just. Am I mistaken, or does it have like lyrics that you sing in Italian or Spanish at some point?
Yeah, there's I think French and Spanish, just a little bit. The premise behind that song was that one of my bandmates at the time had found these recordings of like the black box recordings from airplanes that had crashed.
Wow.
And it was from all over the world, and so I just kind of picked like a few of them and utilized some of these people's last words, and then I wrote some of my own lyrics for the song as well, that just more like a poem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a while. I think we actually recorded that album, probably six years ago or something like that. I'm pretty sure that Masaki had actually used some of those recordings as kind of background on a couple of parts of the song as well.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty grim and like somber thing to really push forward the message of the song and the poems. That's sort of one of those things that kind of hits home, the idea that this is people's last thoughts and words.
Yeah, I feel like that was kind of a theme of several of the songs on that album, was those moments before death, or what is someone thinking about in those moments. And like there was another song, the final song on the album, some of the lyrics from that come from a video of what someone was saying in a video that my bandmate had also just found, on a news site or something, with I think it was a member of the Gulf cartel doing a beheading. And I was just so struck by how insane it was for somebody to just do something like that, and then the words that he says immediately afterwards are very good.
Wow.
And so then to kind of hide it a little bit, we chose to do that phrase in Latin instead of in Spanish, and just to kind of take it out of the exact context from where it came, and create it to be more something that would be a little bit more ancient sounding, or there's a lot of heavy stuff in the lyric writing of that album.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I feel like the songs are a little bit more accessible in some ways than the second record.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that the way you guys write the lyrics, it can easily be interpreted and personalized for anyone who's really listening to it. But
that's great.
Yeah, I think I feel like you can, because when I was reading them and listening to the album, especially your most recent one, I was listening to Toll On. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at the lyrics, it looks like a section of the lyrics are a quote. The "O death, rock me to sleep, bring me to quiet rest. Let pass my weary, guiltless ghost." That's a quote. Can you tell me what that quote is from?
Sure. That is from a song that was attributed to Anne Boleyn, who was one of Henry VIII's wives who he had killed.
Yeah.
And she was locked in the tower for a long time before they actually executed her. And supposedly she wrote that poem. There's a few more verses to it, but I just wanted to use that one excerpt in the song. Supposedly she wrote that poem, and the reason that she was being killed is because she wasn't able to produce an heir.
Right.
And, at the time, her political opponents really, they made up a lot of crazy things about her and accused her of incest and witchcraft and all kinds of stuff. And so I've recorded the song that was attributed to her on one of my solo albums. And, it's like a Renaissance era song. So it has this very kind of lilting melody, and it's just a beautiful piece. So I wanted to kind of pay homage to that when we were writing Toll On. I think what happened was Nicholas, our guitar player, he, presented this idea, and it just sounded like something right out of that era to me. It sounded like, a John Dowland song or something, and I just kind of got inspired.
Right. And Anne Boleyn is one of my wife. It's one of her, I don't know if the word is favorite, but the story behind Anne Boleyn has enamored her, I guess, the most out of many historical figures. And I think it's because it just was so tragic what happened to her. And that some of the things I've read about her, for example, like she apparently said, it'll be easy to behead me because I have a small neck. Like she almost seemed to have a sense of humor about it towards the end. And, what a trip.
What are you going to do at that point,
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you're in that position, you might as well write some, decent poems and crack a joke or two, because, what else you got to do, Now, tell me, a lot of the lyrics that you guys have, they do seem to revolve around, death and the suffering of life. A lot of, like, Wound and Scar, for example, sounds, and I could be wrong, but it sounds to me like the idea of being born like an entryway into suffering, that life on a great deal of levels is suffering. So is that an accurate description of the perception that you guys have when you put together the music and the lyrics? You want to give that sensation, that feel of almost an oppressive suffering?
Well, I can only speak for myself. Not necessarily the opinions of the rest of the band, although we all do seem to have a pretty similar, kind of philosophical outlook. I think that ever since I first started writing music, I've tended to gravitate towards those things that are like a heavier feeling, and those type of subjects, even when I was very young. And I think some of it has got to just be because that's the only thing that's really consistent throughout everyone's experience, is that we are all going to die, and that we are going to experience pain while we're alive. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, especially I've never lived anywhere else, so I can't say, but I feel like people living in America are constantly trying to, and even a lot of the religions that are practiced here are constantly trying to get away from those two things. Mm-hmm. And they don't, it's like most people don't want to think about it. In fact, I've spent a lot of my life trying to not feel, feelings of pain or suffering. However, and also I think that that quest of avoidance is really the driving force behind a lot of our addiction issues that people have. And, we kind of sometimes joke about, remember great grandpa, he broke his leg and went to work anyways, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All those type of stories about people from the past. And then now, everybody has stories about people being overly sensitive, or, looking for excuses to get out of doing things all the time because they hurt their pinky or something. So I just feel like, that kind of culture of avoidance, and it's not okay for you to feel bad. If you have a bad day, that means there's something wrong with you. You've got to go to a doctor. You've got to get on medication. You've got to, confess all of your wrongdoing to somebody. And
mm-hmm.
I just think it's kind of reached a point of absurdity. And I feel like sometimes when I'm writing, what are some of the most impactful times that you may have experienced in your life that you didn't feel like you could talk about with anyone, or you didn't feel like it was safe or appropriate for you to express in the public forum? Well, when you're on stage, or if you're listening to your headphones, or you're at a show, that's the time where it is completely 100%, encouraged
mm-hmm.
to experience those things. And so why would I want to write a song about being happy? If I'm feeling happy, I'm just going to enjoy it.
Right. And not only that, but from my studying of the arts over the years, it seems more like great art is formed in the face of, torment or suffering or adversity. It's all, you don't really hear that much about, this artist, she was very content with her life. She was very rich, had a belly full of food. And so she painted the most beautiful painting you've ever seen in your life. It's always, they were born in poverty, and they had to make choices that were very difficult. And the only way they could express the frustration and the pain of their situation was by painting, or by, developing the poems, or writing a play. I don't think most spiritual or artistic growth comes from being content.
Right. And I think I think that kind of answers the question that you had originally asked. I think that people are expecting to be, there's like this drive like around us everywhere. You got to be happy. You got to be the best at everything all the time. And it's like, no, I mean, if you look at people who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth and have everything they want, guess what they do? They act crazy and do a bunch of really
mm-hmm.
messed up things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they completely reject all of that posh existence, and they just want to go out and smoke crack or something. So I don't, people go, I don't know. I think that's part of it. It's like the story of Siddhartha. I mean, there's a whole story right there.
Yeah.
The person coming from the seat of luxury and says, well, I still need to know all of this other stuff and how it works. And so I think sometimes people just self-sabotage whatever they have going on, or they
mm-hmm.
just think being rich, that sucks. It doesn't mean anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those kinds of struggles, I think anyone can relate to that on some level.
Yeah.
Whether they're coming from one side of the tracks or the other.
Yeah, I would agree that it's, the struggle is the glory to some degree. And no matter where you come from, I mean, like for me, since I've started this podcast, this thing has actually caused me to take a second look at some of the things that I've taken for granted in terms of my belief system. And at first I was really nervous about it. And now I'm kind of like, no, this is good. This is part of a spiritual struggle. I need to ask these questions, and I need to have the courage to, to maybe look at myself in a different way, or the way I believe in things, and grow from that. And so I'm glad to, to be able to talk to other people about their perspectives about this kind of stuff, because I think hearing other people's ideas and their struggles really informs a lot of times how you struggle yourself. Since this podcast is about, your perspectives on God, what are your opinions and ideas about God or an afterlife, Joy?
I've had a long time to think about these things. The family that I was born into was very religious. So, I was they belonged to kind of a more fundamentalist type of Christian group. And my father was a song leader. So this was the type of group that did not believe in instrumental music, singing only, no solos, no choir, full congregational a cappella singing only. That was their thing.
Right.
And women were not allowed to do anything
mm-hmm.
except teach children under the age of 12 in like Sunday school and make food.
Mm-hmm.
And those were their only two functions within the group at all. And I just remember I never understood any of that, I thought it was ridiculous, and I didn't understand why I was going to be excluded from participation in what was being told was, a full spiritual existence just because of my gender.
Yeah.
And
the idea that you're supposed to breed and feed, and that's pretty much your role in life.
Yeah, and the concept of, women are supposed to obey they're supposed to get married and obey their husbands. And I mean, granted, my home life was not like that, but why was my family so involved with this group that taught these things, even if they didn't really believe that completely? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought that was weird. And I just remember, I would ask questions like, well, if I'm supposed to talk to God, why is it that I never get an answer? Because people in the Bible are always, they're always having these visions, or, God's speaking directly to them.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, that's kind of odd. And, I would ask people these questions, and they just say, well, God doesn't do that anymore. And I'm like, well, that's not a good answer,
mm-hmm.
So then when I got to be a little bit, this is when I was like a child, and then when I got to be a little bit older, I started to notice other things too, like, why are the churches segregated? I grew up in the South. I was like, how come there's black church and white church?
Yeah.
And that really bothered me. And, I did go to other kinds of religious groups from time to time with a friend from school or whatever. And I just thought it was all kind of the same thing, and that nobody was really having any kind of real experience from what I could tell. It's just like, it was just like they're going to a lecture or something.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of them were more exciting than others, like, going to the Pentecostal church was kind of crazy. They try to cast the demons out of you by hitting you on your head. And
yeah, those are fun, actually.
Dancing in the aisles. I was like, oh, this is a lot more exciting than the usual ho-hum stuff,
Yeah.
But then when I started to see other stuff, like, okay, so there's racial segregation, that's not okay. There's women are being belittled and undermined constantly, that's not okay. And then, you know, people are thinking it's okay for the older teenage boys or early 20s age boys to young men to be, you know, having their eyes on the young girls and stuff, or you know, molesting them or whatever, and they just kind of turn a blind eye to that sort of thing because they actually kind of want all of their kids to like hook up together because they're all in the same religion. And I thought, well, that's really crazy and weird. And you know, I just thought the whole thing was, I just decided to quit going. You know, when I was about 14. Also, being prejudiced against people who were gay, that really made me mad because I had friends who were gay who were the same age as me, 12, 13 years old. And why should they be excluded from life and freedom and happiness? So I just decided to stop going, and I didn't want to be involved anymore because it didn't have any meaning for me. And I found that, you know, all of the things that people come up with over millennia to create this wealth of mythology, you know, the mythology is interesting, but we always have to look at where is it coming from? Who are the people who began thinking this way? Why is it that, you know, well, and the other thing, sorry, I'm very talkative on this subject.
No, that's fine.
Another thing that really bothered me was that people claim to be Christians, but they don't actually want to follow what the teachings of this guy were, that they say, you know, they just ignore all the stuff that they don't like, such as sell all of your belongings, pool the money together, and use it to feed the widows and the orphans.
Yeah.
You don't see anybody doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I could tell, if they really wanted to be what they were, you know, claiming as the roots of their religion, then they would all be, you know, basically living in homeless shelters, creating organizations that would just distribute food and medicine and clothing, and that would be their entire existence. You know, they wouldn't be doing any of this building giant mega churches and flying a pastor from one mega church to another on his private helicopter. That wouldn't be happening.
Right.
So all of this sort of thing just leads me to believe that, you know, and I've had plenty of experiences that I can't explain in my life that some people would try to interpret into one supernatural thing or another, or say it's God, or say it's, you know, spirits or what. I can't know what it is, so I'm not going to try to figure that out. I think I don't understand why people need to feel that like patriarchal oppressive spirit coming down on them and forcing them to behave one way or another. I just don't get it, you know. I think it's kind of weird. I could maybe understand more like the kind of the mother goddess concept makes a lot more sense to me.
Now, what is that something that you subscribe to, the mother goddess concept?
Well, I don't really believe in any kind of, you know, I don't believe anything I can't see.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, if someone feels like they need to have a religion, the only one that I can really see that makes any sense is something like worshiping a mother goddess, because, you know, that's where you came from, literally. And that just makes a lot more sense to me than some sort of old man in the sky throwing lightning bolts at you if you do bad things. That, to me, makes absolutely no sense. So I guess I'm kind of a materialist in the way I view things. And because I also feel like if anybody tries to tell you that they know what happens after you're dead, then don't believe them, because they don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, saying it with like great authority.
Huh?
Saying it with like a great authority.
Yeah, I mean, we can all sit around and speculate, and I think that's amazing. That's the most fascinating part about any mythology to me, is people coming up with speculation on where they came from and where they're going after they die.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you start to believe it at the expense of taking care of the people in your life, that's completely unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
If you're starting to treat the people in your family or in your community in a disrespectful and unequal way based on something that you think is going to happen after you die, or what you think is going to happen to them after they die,
mm-hmm.
then you need to ask yourself the question, how do I know that?
Right.
And that's my view on those subjects.
Right. And and one of the things that me as a Christian, I get frustrated by is when there are so many verses that are taken by fellow Christians, they're taken completely out of context, and they're almost weaponized to convince somebody of their point of view. And what's frustrating is because when I was younger, I used to do that thing. I used to do that exact same thing until I started actually going into my Bible and actually reading, what was the historical context of this book? Why was it being written? To whom was it being written? And then looking at, the surrounding scriptures and coming to find out that about 90% of what I had been taught these things mean were actually the complete opposite. And it goes back to what you're saying, is that, there are so many Christians who are believing one way, but they don't understand that way of thinking comes from, like you said, like a patriarchal mindset from hundreds and thousands of years of history, and it's just being passed on. And on, when you look at the text itself, that's not at all what it's saying. And you've got it very wrong, and that drives me crazy when, especially like you say, with a gay person being excluded from churches, from like a fundamentalist church and whatnot. There's nothing scriptural that says that's okay. There's nothing there that says it's okay to exclude someone. And then you get the whole, love the sinner, hate the sin, and then which I always counter with, but okay, what is sin? How do you define sin? And then it becomes this whole other thing, because a lot of the times what happens is when people say, well, this person has sinned, they're going to hell. It's like, okay, so that means anytime you do something wrong, you're going to hell? Is that how that operates? Because that's not what the Bible actually says. And it's one of those things that drives me nuts, and it's one of those things I guess you can tell I have a pretty strong opinion about too. But I almost feel like a person with a Jeremiad point of view when it comes to my own personal belief system, and most of the people that claim to be Christians believe, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder. I wonder what it is that makes somebody feel like they need to be concerned about what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
A, that's a good question. B, because I don't subscribe to any, I don't live my life according to any kind of religious principles. I wonder why it is that people would still be debating these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think I felt so much. I feel a lot of sympathy for anyone who is living in fear of being separated from this concept of God or heaven. And then I want every one of those people, whoever they may be, to ask themselves, what am I afraid of? And who told me to be afraid of it?
Mm-hmm.
And why am I so concerned about this? Because there's absolutely no proof whatsoever that anything in that book is anything more than a lot of writings made by a lot of people over a very long period of time that's been translated, retranslated. And I think, like any very long-standing work of literature, we have to go back to the exact source of where was this written down, who wrote it down, when, and what does that have to do with me?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I trying to fit my way of thinking and my life into some standards that were created by somebody thousands of years ago? You know, what's appropriate about this in any way? I think there's some basic things that we can all agree on, like it's going to cause a lot of social problems if people just go around murdering whoever they want to murder in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good for society. Or it's going to cause a lot of problems if you're always trying to, you know, hook up with your friend's boyfriend or wife or whatever, and they're not interested. You know, if that's going to be a violation of their commitment to each other, then, you know, leave it alone.
Yeah.
I think those things, you know, it causes a lot of complications socially when people start lying to each other about things all the time. So I think those are some basic tenets that are in most social groups, religious guidelines or legal documents, or, you know, however you want to look at it, whether it's a secular thing or whether it's something that's coming from a clerical, you know, mandate. However, I just feel like, wouldn't it be better if we just thought of those things in the terms of how they will affect the community that we live in?
Mm-hmm.
Because why would I follow some story? You know, I never understood that.
Right.
And I think that people take it as some kind of a mandate that they have to believe the thing that they have been told from the time in my case, from the time I was born, that you're told this is how it is, and if you don't believe this, then, you know, you're going to be lost.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean to be lost? Well, I can tell you right now, I felt very lost being at that church.
Yeah.
You know, it was not right for me. And the whole concept of having some sort of a structure that you're going to live your life by, I think maybe that's a good place to start for most people. But when they start using it as a cage, that's where I think it needs to be broken down.
Yeah. Yeah, I always detested the fear aspect of trying to get someone to believe in something, because that's not being compelled, that's being forced. And I can't think of any examples where being forced into something is a really good idea for the person in the long term.
Yeah, and why? And what is the motivation behind doing that? Is it because
Mm-hmm.
you want to feel some sort of superiority over them, or is it because, you know, I think I've definitely been around people who feel like they have this mission that they have to somehow collect all these souls for God, and I just go, you know, everybody needs to make their own decisions in life. And it's not fair for you to go around trying to force other people to conform to your way of thinking.
Yeah, at our church, we call those guys the spiritual muggers. The ones that come try to knock you over the head with, you need to believe or you're going to die. It's like, I'm just trying to get some gas, man, you know?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
But, yeah, I completely agree that, you know, I don't understand the motivation, and I feel like a lot, you said you were raised in the South, so you can probably appreciate this, is a lot of the Southern Baptist churches that are around here. I'm in North Carolina, and a lot of them, I've attended quite a few of them, it almost seems more rooted in really good salesmanship than spirituality. And that was always something that never set well with me, even when I was a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's something strange about when the churches have become a business. And I would say this about any organized religion. I'm not specifically speaking about churches, although there are a lot of them in this country. But
right.
I feel like any of the organized religions, I don't understand what the purpose is of having a business. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, sometimes in popular culture, they kind of make fun of the storefront preacher types who, or tent revivalist type things from the old times, where they kind of get everybody going and pass around the collection plate and get some money, and then they move on to the next town.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's it's become kind of a joke in, American culture. But why are people not able to see that same thing is happening at the highest level of income?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I just can't envision a reason for it. That's all. Is it because people want to feel like they're part of something that's successful and that they get to go to a nice building, or like, what is it? They want to have a big sound system, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not feeding anybody. It's not changing the capitalist society that's causing so many problems in our country.
Mm-hmm.
It's not doing anything to help that. In fact, it's reinforcing it. In fact, a lot of these people who are running these big churches are specifically telling their congregation how to vote.
Yeah.
And I think that's just sickening.
And another common thread you seem to find with a lot of them is they preach the prosperity gospel of, giving to the church, and you're going to find, 10 times more in your bank account in like a month. And
it makes me so mad.
I know. I'm just like, I don't know where you saw that nonsense in the Bible, but whatever. People seem to want to do it. I don't get it, but.
Well, it's preying on people's poverty.
Mm-hmm.
It's preying on their fears, and it's distorting their sense of hope. And I feel like exploiting people's desire for change it's just one of the most twisted things, and that's why I really feel like a lot of religious groups really do this, because they, whoever has, I don't know what people's motivations are who want to rise to the top of a religious organization. Sometimes I'm sure they have good intentions,
mm-hmm.
but other times I just go, why are you trying to exploit these people's feelings of despair? If they're going through a rough time, or maybe they're not able to be successful in life because of other factors like sickness or lack of education, or because the system that we live in is designed to keep them however they are. Why would you want to exploit that by giving them a false sense? Like, well, we're not going to help you change anything now, but your reward's going to be after you die. Trust me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is just so asinine to me. But I feel like human beings, a lot of times, they just want to have that sense of hope, that door always open.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I just never personally felt that way. I always felt like the door was closed, or
mm-hmm.
maybe cracked just a little bit, but I wasn't going to entertain the idea that it's going to be open.
Right.
And so I just kind of formulated this other view that seems a lot more realistic, and I'm much happier now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would agree. I can go along with what you're saying, that when I was younger, the idea that part of my mindset was, well, I will, this will be kind of a miserable existence, but when I die, I go to heaven, everything's going to be fine. And then, to go back to what I said before, when I started really doing the research for myself, I came to realize that that's not true. There will be suffering, but you can enjoy your life. It's not bad to have a good time. And I've become much more spiritually content once I came to that realization that, being happy in your life and making choices that are going to be, healthy for you and that are helpful to others and to be encouraging and maybe, talk to people who don't have the same perspectives and points of view. It's all very healthy and nurturing, and it's very good. And when I came to that realization and started living my life that way, I've been much, much happier in the idea of being free from fear and shame. I feel like a lot of shame is involved in a lot of religions. And so, being freed from any of that kind of stuff is a much better way of living, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree.
Yeah. And it's just, I agree with you that I feel so bad for so many people who have kind of resigned themselves to complete misery. It's like, I get that there's going to be suffering and there's going to be problems and there's going to be all kinds of bad things. That's just the nature of living and being mortal. But when some people are just like, well, I'm going to be completely miserable and that's just the way it is, I feel so bad for them, because you want to figure out some way of convincing them. It's like, no, you don't have to do that. You can have a good time. Well, listen, I appreciate you. I think I've kept you on for almost 45 minutes. I didn't mean to.
Oh, really?
I didn't mean to keep you on that long. I'm not that I'm complaining. I've been enjoying this. I actually would like to possibly talk to you again about some of this subject matter. I feel like there's more to delve into, and it was interesting listening to your perspective. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to talk to you again if you'd ever be available.
That would be great, David. I'd love to talk to you again.
Okay. Well, I will definitely be in touch about doing that. And before we go, do you want to let the listeners know where they can find Eye of Nix music, merchandise, all that kind of stuff?
Oh, sure. So right now, I don't know if you still have any in your distro, but our most recent album, Black Somnia, is available at a couple of different distros in the U.S., and it's also been reissued by the German and U.S. label Prophecy, and so you can get that in the U.K. and in the EU through them, or in the U.S. now as well. You can get the reissue. And we also have some available through the Scry Recordings website, and I believe Black Horizons distro, Cloister Recordings, and also I think that's it. You can get the album digitally on Bandcamp, and also iTunes and all of the usual places you might go online for streaming or downloads.
Okay. Well, great.
And, we do have a new album that's going to be coming out pretty soon here in probably in a few months. So I definitely would love to talk to you again once we have that available too. Just to, I'd like to have you hear it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, definitely. When that's coming around, touch base. That'd be a perfect time to do another one of these.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. You've got my email, my number, so email or text, either way is fine.
All right. Well, thank you again, David.
Thank you, Joy. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Bye-bye. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Rock God Podcast. Check out our website, heavy-vinyl.com, or go to any of our social media pages on Instagram, Heavy Vinyl Records, Facebook, Heavy Vinyl and Cassettes, and on Twitter, we are at Vinyl Heavy. I want to thank everyone in Eye of Nix, and I want to thank Joy Von Spain for taking some time to talk to us. So, until next time, God bless.